Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, where we answer your questions on matters from history to political philosophy to culture to current events.
Here's one from Murray who's asking you, where do you stand on Bill C-16?
I am very strongly against Bill C-16, which might seem like an odd or heartless stand, because the purpose of the act is to amend the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code to include sexual orientation, particularly more recent
Gender expression, I think is
gender
the word.
expression, they would call it, the newest trend in sexual identity, under prohibited grounds for discrimination and under the hate speech laws. And I'm against it for several reasons. And the first of them is that I am against the concept of hate speech laws in general. If a remark tends to incite violence or constitutes criminal conspiracy, it is and should rightly be illegal. But if it merely expresses an offensive opinion, it's an exercise of free speech in an unfortunate or despicable way. And that's not illegal. The whole point of free speech is in order to test ideas in the public arena, to allow people to say things that might seem shocking. And I would remind you, at one time, the notion of homosexual rights seemed shocking. If we lived in a country where censorship existed, it might have been stopped before it started. Gay marriage upset a lot of people. Remember, in 1999, there was a vote in Parliament against gay marriage. And the liberal government of Jean Chrétien was firmly on the side of those against it. The justice minister said it was a waste of time even to hold the vote. Nobody thought marriage was anything other than one man and one woman, she said. So we didn't shut down debate. Things changed rather dramatically. For that reason, I do not believe it should be illegal to express bigoted sentiments. I think if you do that, you expose yourself to the world. It's called the Dracula effect, or sunlight destroys evil. But we need to allow free speech, and we need to allow free obnoxious speech, because if we start by banning free obnoxious speech, the definition of obnoxious is going to expand dramatically, as indeed it already has, to the point where anybody's feelings are hurt, kaboom, it's hate speech. And right now we are actually having a debate, or trying to, on this whole question of transgender. Is it really the most compassionate, appropriate response from a scientific or a moral point of view if somebody says, gee, I think I might be the other gender, to go, oh, fine, okay, you're she then, or you're he? Or do we say, well, hang on, maybe we should talk this through a little more. Maybe this is not really the path to happiness for you. And there is scientific debate about this, although those who raise questions do tend to be subjected to 2-minute hates. And that's a bad thing in an open society. I mean, if somebody stands up and says they think black people are inferior, they should be shunned. To some extent, it's worth arguing with them merely to show people how wrong that point of view is. But at a certain point, you just say, fine, I refuse to have anything to do with you. Except in Canada, you can't. Because along with free speech, freedom of association is under siege. Increasingly, you cannot say, I will choose with whom I associate and with whom I do not associate. And again, this seems unexceptionable, even highly desirable, because people think back to segregation, say, oh, what do you want, black people sent to the back of the bus? But it's important to remember here that segregation was not a social system, it was a legal system. Bigots had taken over the governments, and they were forcing private citizens to act as though they were racist, even when they weren't. I mean, the famous 1896 case, Plessy v. Ferguson, where the U.S. Supreme Court upheld segregation on streetcars. The streetcar company was against the segregation law because it was an insult to their black customers, and they didn't think they were going to prosper by insulting paying riders. The bigots knew that if they didn't force people to behave in accordance with their hateful beliefs, at the fringes the system would erode. Decency would prevail, so they set up legal fences against it. And that's important to grasp when you look at this concept that you can't discriminate. Except sometimes you can. For instance, what about a women-only gym? Because some women feel uncomfortable exercising with men there, whether they're gawkers or they just have this feeling that they're being judged. And you might say, well, it's too bad that should exist. Everyone should be proud of their body. But if it does exist, and if it helps some women to exercise, be healthier, and feel better about themselves to set up a women-only gym, why should the law tell them they can't?
Which is odd, by the way, because if you want somebody to judge you, try another woman.
Well, yeah. But the fact that we don't agree with it doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. The same thing, some people think that because of historical disadvantage and problems with education, there is a case to be made for black-only schools. And again, I don't think that's true. But I certainly wouldn't use the law to prohibit it, even though what you have here is a school that says no white person can come in. Or, someone sets up a gay-only cruise for whatever reason, including, again, this feeling perhaps if there are straight people around that they'll just be looking at you strangely and you don't like that. It spoils your holiday. Should you feel that way? Is it really happening? These are things for you to decide. But if you want to set up a gay-only cruise and tell me you can't go because you're not gay, my reaction is, it's your cruise, fine by me. And
So it's like a private club. You're allowed to have a private club for certain groups of people and not others, right?
But yes,
You
but
should be.
the funny thing is you're only allowed to have private clubs for relatively trivial things these days. For instance, you have a chess club and you don't let people in who want to play bridge. But when it comes to
That's
something like
discrimination.
Trinity Western University, which required students to sign a covenant that they would not engage in premarital sex. And this applied to everybody. Oh, you're homophobic or something along those lines. Well, of course, if you're homosexual, then you're not going to engage in marital sex as Trinity Western understands it. But heterosexuals weren't allowed to do it either. And yet this was said, oh, this is a denial of people's human rights, that they can't come to a university founded by people whose beliefs they found abhorrent. It's not that they were going to be prevented from practicing the law. They weren't going to be stopped from voting in elections or any of that sort of thing. So I don't think there should be laws banning obnoxious speech. I don't think there should be laws banning obnoxious freedom of association. I also worry about C16 because it is at the sharp end of a very aggressive attempt to shut down a debate that we need to have. There's so much that needs to be said about gender in society, about the importance of fathers in the lives of daughters as well as sons. Fathers, not parents, not 3 parents, not 7 parents, as defined by the law, meaning any people who signed a contract before the baby was born, which increasingly is what the law says. We got to talk about this stuff, and laws like this are going to be used to shut it down. So I think they are dangerous to social concerns. I think they are dangerous to individual freedom. I think they are dangerous to the right of individuals to choose to do the right thing because it is the right thing, not because there's a policeman standing there tapping his truncheon in his hand, waiting for you to say an unapproved thing so he can belt you with it. That's not how a free society works. It's not how a decent society works. So C16 should be repealed, and so should much of the law that it's going to modify.
Right, but let me just ask you this one quickly, because for a lot of people who are on the side of C16, they say, hey, you guys didn't say anything when it was race or religion or any other grounds for discrimination, but suddenly it's gender identity and gender definition and or identification, and suddenly you're up in arms. Is that something you have against us?
And I can understand that they would feel that way. There may be some justice to that claim in some cases. In my case, there's not, because I've been clear on this all along. Free speech means the right to say obnoxious things. It means the right to say that Jews control international banking. It means the right to say that Asians are better at math. Whether or not these things are true is not the test of whether or not you should be allowed to say them.
Legally, even though socially you
Yeah,
can't.
you take the social consequences. If you're a jerk, people aren't going to want to be around you, and there's no human rights law protecting jerks, at least not yet. Although, now they have these things like oppositional defiant disorder, I mean, I had that when I was a kid. It was just that I was just a jerk, right? But now it might be a protected medical condition. You laugh, but satire cannot keep up with reality. The important thing is to say that we have a principle of freedom here, the kind that was outlined by John Stuart Mill, who was in many ways, by the way, very controversial for his views on gender, which were extremely progressive at the time. He was once arrested for handing out birth control literature. But he said, absolutely, you allow free speech and may the best idea win. And the people who are afraid to do that are cowards and bullies, even if they present themselves as social justice warriors. We must not allow them to silence debate and to threaten people, to threaten their academic positions, to threaten their employment, to threaten them with jail if they should say something which is not currently the approved wisdom. Because that's not how free societies operate, and it's not how people flourish as individuals and come to see one another as brothers and sisters. As somebody once said, if we actually could achieve perfect social justice, people might well not be in a mood to live together afterwards. And that would not be a triumph for the human spirit.
All right. All right, then. Thanks for that, folks. If you would like to play along and ask your question of the professor, go to the URL on your screen, and everything there will be explained. Thanks, and see you next time.